Good morning, good afternoon to all of you. Welcome to the Siam Professional with the Chief Examiner Kevin Holland that is going to be presenting to you different questions about Siam. I would like to encourage you to send questions along the presentations that is going to be available on the right side of your screen, located on the GoToWebinar control panel, the tab Questions. During the presentation, you can address all your questions to Kevin, that I'm going to read the questions at certain points of the presentation. So please do not hesitate to write down your question, and this is going to be addressed to Kevin. Okay, Kevin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ademar. Hello, as Ademar said, I'm Kevin Holland. I'm the Chief Examiner for the Siam Professional Qualification for EXIN. I was also involved in writing the Siam Body of Knowledge, the Foundation Body of Knowledge, and the Professional Body of Knowledge as well. Okay. Right. I want to give some context, first of all, to this qualification. The key thing here is that, excuse me, just clicking through various things. This exam is testing skills at a high level. It is a much higher level than foundation. And we use Bloom's methodology to identify what level that is. And the key levels we're testing at is application level 3, analysis level 4. Application is about solving problems in new situations, choosing appropriate actions. Level 4 is examining and breaking information to identify motives and causes, to make inferences and find evidence. Very key things. Now that's quite challenging to test in a multiple choice type question format. But the key thing here is at this level of qualification, somebody that gets the qualification as a Siam professional should be able to do consulting work, to go into a client organization, gather facts, review the situation in that organization, and make appropriate recommendations. That's the level of skill that is required to pass this particular qualification. Now, to support that in the multiple choice format, we have a case study, and then the questions against that case study. And that's been written as if it was a genuine situation. So ZYX, imagine that's a genuine situation. So as a candidate, you've been invited into that organization to understand who are the providers, what are the constraints, what are the contract landscapes, everything about it that's in the case study. And then be asked specific questions, set specific challenges, and then you give the best answer based on your experience, on what Siam's all about and the case study. That means for many questions, there is more than one plausible answer. This isn't foundation when there is only one correct answer. There can be 4 correct answers in some of the questions, but one of them is the best answer that meets the requirement set out in that question. This is very important to understand. This is not a turn up, read the body of knowledge and expect to pass. This needs analysis and application skills. Trying to get my screen to move on to the next one. Excuse me, my mouse is in the wrong place. Oh, wrong one. So let's look at the first question here. Question 2 out of the Japanese set, question 2 out of 30. So this is about ZYX using external service integrator. The CIO has asked in a consultancy organization to provide some recommendations about the future Siam ecosystem, the roles that are required and where they should be established. And Siam RS is documenting the proposal for who should be the Siam governance lead. The key thing about all these questions in all the exams is to read the question, understand the context. So this is supplementing the case study. So straight away, it's an external service integrator that ZYX want to use. That's the context. Look at the roles. Look at who's being asked to do what in the question. Siam RS are not being asked to be the service integrator. They are asked to provide some recommendations on who should be the Siam governance lead. Now, there are 4 answers here. Now, with a bit of basic knowledge from where the Siam governance lead should reside, in which part of the Siam layers, you can immediately eliminate two of these answers. So the definition of the Siam governance lead, the section in the body of knowledge, says the Siam governance lead resides in the retained capabilities. Now, with the knowledge of the case study, you can look at this now to go, right, the ZY, answer D, the ZYXS service management and service desk lead. Key concept in Siam is that they will be a service provider. People provide the service desk as a service provider. They therefore will not be in the retained capabilities, so you can eliminate answer D. Answer C, the ZYXS IT director. Irrespective of what skills that person has, they're in ZYXS, we're going to be a service provider, therefore they're not in the retained capabilities, therefore that isn't a possible answer either. So you're now down to answer A and B, and this is a good technique for all questions, to go through and try and eliminate answers that are just wrong. Some questions that isn't possible, but this one it is. So let's go back to answer A now, ZYXCEO. Could they be the Siam governance lead? They may have the skills, but you wouldn't have the chief executive officer of an organization, the top person in the organization, taking on the role of Siam governance lead. That is too high a level in the organization. Now, the Siam governance lead has to be a senior role, a higher role, so you're left with one plausible answer. The ZYXCIO, they are a senior role, they're in the retained capabilities, and if you've looked at the skills for the CIO, they have the right skills for what the body of knowledge says a Siam governance lead should have. So that will lead you to the correct answer. I was asked some supplementary questions here about this. So the questions about governance lead, what if the question was saying, who should be the Siam project manager? Who should it be? The ZYXS IT director or Siam RS? And would the project manager report to the Siam governance lead? Now, this question isn't about that. If it was, the key thing here is, I think I've gone one far up, sorry. There isn't enough information in the case study or the question as it's posed to recommend who should be the Siam project manager. If you look at the body of knowledge, there's no guidance in there about where the Siam project manager should be from. That will depend on each unique implementation project. But having said that, it would be unlikely to be a UK ZXX IT director. There's no mention in the case study of them having any project management skills. And if they're the IT director, they would unlikely to have enough time to also be a project manager. And I'd find it very unusual to have a director as the project manager. Siam RS in this case study and question are only being asked to be a consultant. Now, if they had been selected as the service integrator and they are using their own model, they could be a good candidate to be the project manager, because a consultancy organization like that would have project management skills. So it really does depend on the scenario, on what's given in the question, on what's given in the case study as to who can take which role. Now, a question about who should the project manager report to, they should report to the Siam project board. It's very unlikely that to report to a Siam governance lead. A Siam governance lead is at a strategic level, assuring the implementation and the operation against the Siam strategy. It's not a project-related role, project management role. And if you look in the body of knowledge, it says that the Siam project board says the board steps in when the project manager needs higher authority for decisions. So a key learning point there is to really understand the different roles as described in the body of knowledge and understand the case study before you go into the exam, and look at which role, which person in the case study could take which role based on which organization they're in and their skills. Now that's the first question. Before I take any questions about that, I just want to bring out some generic learning points that apply to all the questions, both in the sample exam and the live exams. As preparation, you need to understand all of the roles listed in the case study, all of the different people, all of the different individuals, what they do in the organization, what their skills are from previous organizations, and map those capabilities against possible Siam roles. Just as if you were a consultant going into an organization, gathering facts and building that picture for yourself. And the same is true for the service provider. So for each service provider in the case study, before you go into that exam, you need to be analyzing that. Is that provider an internal provider or an external provider? ZYXS are an internal provider, ZYXD internal. What services do those service providers currently provide? There's a big table in the case study. What services could they provide? Siam RS is a good example. They're providing consulting services at the moment, but they could be a service integrator. There's services that they could provide. Crucially, what kind of services does each provider provide? Are they bespoke services, specially written? Are they commodity services that provide the same service to everybody? And how critical are those services to ZYX? A lot of the questions probe around that particular aspect, and the correct answer depends on, can you replace this provider with another one because it's a commodity service, or is it bespoke to ZYX? What type of organization is that service provider? Are they flexible, or do they have a fixed model? Siam RS provide a fixed model. That's what it says. Whereas Outco are very flexible. That can have a bearing on which is the correct answer for a particular question. And very importantly, how long does each contract have left to run? So what's the criticality on replacing that provider? Don't make assumptions. The case study does not say that Siam RS will be an external service integrator. The question will tell you if that's going to be true or not in the body of the question. And the key thing here is to read every question very carefully. Who is taking each role in the Siam layers? In the previous example, the question, it said what Siam RS were doing. It said there'd be an external provider for the integrator, didn't say who. But very crucially, what challenge is the question setting? Is it asking about risk? Is it asking about what is it asking about? Reading that question and being very sure about what you're being asked against is the key to success. Any questions on so far on that one?
Hi, Kevin. Yes, there is a question over here. The question is CEO in retained capability?
It's a very good question. It's certainly in the customer organization. It's unlikely that the CEO would actually be in the retained capabilities. The retained capabilities is the part of the customer organization that is there to own the contracts and manage the service integrator. So think of it as an internal unit within the customer. A CEO is really above that level. Typically, and it's worth looking at the foundation body of knowledge as well as the professional body of knowledge, because the foundation body of knowledge sets out quite nicely the kind of roles that belong in the retained capabilities and the separation between the retained capabilities and the customer organization. So highly unlikely that a CEO, the top of that organization, would be in retained capabilities, but something like a head of service management would be in the retained capabilities. Okay, to move on?
No more questions, Kevin. You can go on.
Yep, please, yep. Okay, question 16. So Outco has been proposed as the external service integrator for ZYX. Very clear statement there. So Outco are being proposed as the external integrator. Outco will also provide a central service desk and hosting. So you've now got an external service integrator providing other services. So they're now a lead service integrator. ZYXH are going to provide retained capabilities. So that's the background. Now we get to the challenge. The CEO wants to be able to easily replace any of the services from Outco if they don't achieve their service levels. What's the best contract arrangement for Outco for ZYX? So it's about the different contracting arrangements. And there are 4 possible answers here. But let's look down them and eliminate any ones. Straight away, answer D. Update the existing contract with Outco to remove services that are no longer required. You need knowledge of the case study. Outco are currently contracted to provide services for ZYX UK only. That contract expires in 8 months' time. That contract will be replaced. That contract is not going to be the contract for service integration or for hosting or for a central service desk. Therefore, answer D is not a valid answer. It's for something completely different than existing contract. Now it gets more challenging. You now have 3 answers that could be correct. So let's look at answer A. And unfortunately, this does rely on the precise way the English is constructed. And I've actually had an idea that some of the challenges with Japan may be in the translation from the English. So I've actually agreed with EXIN that I'm going to look at the questions to see which have a poorer pass rate, which questions, and identify which of those. And then I'm going to look back at the way the English was constructed and highlight those as possible questions that we need to look at and improve. So we're going to do that in the coming weeks. So answer A, create contracts, each with an MSA, a master service agreement, schedules, and statements of work for each of the 3 services. The way the answer is constructed basically says there will be 3 contracts, each absolutely identical, 3 copied contracts, each of them with all 3 services in them. Now that does allow one of them to be terminated, but you have significant duplication across those 3 contracts. Each contract has 3 services in it, but actually you only want it to apply against one. So we get very, very confusing. This is where the Bloom's level comes in. There's some analysis work needed to do here. There's some which is a better option type discussion to have with yourself. Answer C, create a single contract with 3 different schedules for the different types of service. Now that's a valid structure for a contract. 1 contract, 1 schedule for the service integration piece, 1 for the service desk, 1 for the hosting. But that would make it more challenging to terminate just one of the services. And the question says the CIO wants to be able to easily replace any of the services if they don't achieve the service levels. So that's not quite so good an answer. Answer B also says create 3 separate contracts with associated schedules for each of the services. Straight away, 3 separate contracts, 1 for each of those services, answers that challenge. That's easier to replace. Now that doesn't mention MSAs, Master Services Agreement, or Statements of Work. But if you go back to the body of knowledge, it doesn't say you have to have an MSA or a Statement of Work. It says that's just one way to put together a contract. Now I'd ask the question, is this a suitable structure for a provider with 3 distinct services? A master service agreement, and underneath that, for each of those different services, a support schedule and a statement of work. Support schedule, external integrator, statement of work, external, etc., etc., etc. So look at that structure. It's a possible structure. How contracts are structured in the real world can vary substantially for every different implementation of Siam. It depends on the geographical requirements, any legal requirements in the organization. It depends on the legal team's own preference, the purchasing team's preference. So what you propose there is a possible structure, but you haven't actually told me if it's all under one contract or not. Now, if your proposal said 3 contracts, each with a common MSA and associated schedules and statements of work, that'd be a good answer. And if that answer was in the question, it would probably leap out at you being the obviously correct answer. But remember, we want people to think about the answer. It isn't just one very obvious one. Key point there, though, a support schedule, you asked me, is a support schedule a service catalogue? It's not. A support schedule is a way to structure a contract. It brings together similar requirements. So you could have a support schedule with all the security requirements. You could have a support schedule with all the testing requirements. A support schedule can be common across many services or just be for a particular service. So it's a contractual mechanism. It's not a service catalogue. A statement of work is not a service request. You asked me, is a statement of work a service request? A statement of work is another contractual mechanism that contains requirements specific to one service or group of services. It's usually used for service levels, hours of support, what maintenance is permitted. So it's very, very service specific. It's not a service request. But you don't have to have a one-to-one relationship between a statement of work and a support schedule. And if you look at figure 15 of the body of knowledge, it doesn't show that. It shows a master service agreement, a couple of support schedules, some different statements of work. So there isn't a hard and fast rule here on how to structure a contract. There are some examples. And that's why in this question, just looking for, that answer says MSA and SOW, that must be the correct answer, that won't give you the right answer. You have to look at it and do the analysis. Any questions on this one, please?
Kevin, we have a question that it is, where is the definition of service going to contract or services reused?
Can you repeat the question, Queen Ademar?
Yeah, where is the definition of service going to contract?
Of services going to contract, is that the question?
Yes. Where is the definition of this?
There isn't a precise definition. If you look at the section that's to do with master service agreement and statement of work, it talks about how to construct it in there. There is also a section in the foundation body of knowledge that talks about how best to work out what your services are and what your service groupings are, and then that leads into how you form the contract. So it's not defined, but it gives you the techniques for how they should go together. But if you stand back and look at it, you have a contract between the customer and the service provider. That contract has to specify what services that service provider provides. That's the base definition that we're talking about here. But this section of the body of knowledge and this question is about structuring that particular set of contracts. And it doesn't actually say in the body of knowledge that about terminating contracts that you have to separate them out. And this is where we are at a professional level, that some of that knowledge isn't in the body of knowledge. It's in general knowledge as well. It's in understanding how IT and contracting works, about how IT and IT service management works. And we recommend knowledge of IT service management. And in there, it's pretty common practice to be able to have a contract that you can uniquely terminate because it has its own set of services.
Kevin, actually, he typed again the question. I will rephrase the question to you, okay?
Yep.
Where is the definition of services going to contract or services requests?
Service requests. I can't remember exactly where service requests are defined, but service requests in this context will be out of the ITIL definition. So a service request is where a user requests something to happen. So a service request in that context could be, I'd like a new PC, please, or I'm moving desks, or please can you provide me with training. So service requests have no relationship with contractual structures at all. Service request may be in the glossary. I hadn't got them open at the moment, but if they're not in the Siam body of knowledge glossary, it's in pretty common usage, service request across service management, IT service management, and a good place to look would be the ITIL glossary as well.
No more questions. You can proceed.
Yep, carry on. Thank you. Right, question 19. Excuse me. So this requires knowledge about ZYX and the services it provides to its outside customers and how important they are and what status they are in being replaced. So a major bank has decided to stop using BNK. Bank is the legacy system that's being used, that's sold by ZYX to its banking customers. It will severely affect the profitability of ZYX. So something has to happen here. The CIO has asked to consider transferring all services currently provided by ZYX and ZYXD to Outco. So the CIX is saying, what are the risks? What's the greatest risk with outsourcing the services to ZYX and ZYXD, but it's related to stopping the use of bank? So let's look at the possible answers. So answer A. Is the greatest risk to amend the terms of the hosting contract with BankCo. Now, if you look at the case study, ZYX currently host the BNK application for BankCo. Now, all we're talking about here is moving the hosting from ZYXD host it, from ZYXD to Outco. Moving a hosting contract is pretty straightforward. We're not talking about changing the details of how it would be hosting. There's nothing in this question that says changing the detail of how it's hosted. It's just saying move the hosting provider. That's a relatively straightforward activity. There's a thing called contract novation, which is quite commonly done when you do that. So that's not going to be a high risk. Remember, we're asking about greatest risk. Now, it would need amending, but we're not talking about a high risk there. The second one, changing the culture of the staff in ZYXS and ZYXD. The case study talks about some issues with culture in ZYXD there. But is that a major risk to outsource it? Outco, and you need the case study knowledge here, are a major outsourcer. It says they're a major outsourcer. They will be experienced in organizational change management. They will have the techniques in how to change culture of any staff that come across to them. Add a bit more context. What if none of the staff from ZYXS and ZYXD transfer to Outco? Then that's not a risk anyway, changing their culture. So yes, there's a risk there, but is it the highest risk? Let's look at answer D next, the last answer. Outco acquiring the knowledge needed to operate the services. There is a risk there about knowledge transfer, but Outco are a major outsourcer. They are used to taking over services. They will have techniques to gather that information. And we're talking about hosting here for ZYXD. It's pretty straightforward. And also under the arrangements, it depends on the legislative arrangements, but it's probable that the ZYXD would transfer to Outco. It's called TUPE in the UK, transfer of protected employment status. So there is a risk. But let's look at answer D, maintaining the support of the current staff in ZYXS and ZYXD. ZYXD are hosting Bank at the moment. If they don't support this move and stop fixing issues with Bank, then not only would the customer that's leaving be upset, all the other current customers of bank would also be upset. So there's a risk here to the continuity of the current service if you don't have that staff support. But also in the case study, the replacement application, new bank, is ready for deployment. That's being developed by ZYXS. If you lose the support of the staff in ZYXS, that new application is at risk. That is a significant risk to the continuity of business for ZYX and their future. So there are two high risks here. Therefore, answer C becomes the greatest risk in adopting that strategy. So this is a good example of a question where every answer is possible. Everyone has a risk. You need the knowledge of the case study and a bit of analysis work here and evaluating those options to come up with which is the correct answer. The question that I was posed here by yourself is the risk here about staff will focus on new opportunities instead of knowledge transfer? That's absolutely correct. I've been in an organization where we were about to be outsourced and I left. I found another job. A lot of my colleagues did. And it's that risk of the support of those current people, trying to keep them on board, that you need to manage. And a very good question was posed. How could you mitigate that risk? Pay incentives or early life support? Now, I think we've alluded here already. Getting this correct answer needs knowledge of the case study and the different possibilities. Current staff in ZYXS, ZYXD could absolutely focus on themselves and not on knowledge transfer. I've also been in an organization where we were outsourcing where we just didn't want to help the outsourcer and didn't transfer any knowledge. And a good mitigation, as you've said, is pay incentives. A good one could be for Outco, the outsourcer, to pay the staff in ZYXS and ZYXD a bonus on successful transfer into their organization, and define successful transfer as knowledge has been transferred and the services are being run. That's called a golden hello in some countries. So there is incentive now on the current staff in ZYXS and ZYXD to stay, to help and support Outco. Early life support is more a general technique for using major new services. You would always establish early life support for any service transitioning like this. So you wouldn't really associate any money, financial value with that. You could, as ZYXS, put a requirement on Outco, withhold a payment until the early life support has successfully concluded. Now that's quite common as well, to pay on successful transfer once the service levels have been achieved. That gives Outco an incentive to do the best they can as well to gather the knowledge and keep the services running. But the question is really about two angles, keeping bank supported and also about new bank. And whatever Outco do, you're trying to keep the ZYXS staff particular, interested and motivated to stay with the organization. But financial incentives are always a good answer. Any questions on that one, please?
No questions for now, Kevin.
Okay, thank you, Ademar. Excuse me. Question 21, a lot in this one. So the CIO has decided the service integrator will be external. The board of directors have decided not to renew the contract with Outco, so it will end in 8 months' time. So if you know the case study, you know that Outco provides services currently only to ZYX UK. So the replacement will be sourced from multiple service providers in line with the mandate for change. It's important that you understand everything in that mandate for change that's in the case study, because that provides the context around how quickly the CEO wants the transition to Siam to occur and what his attitude to risk is. So the board of directors has asked the CIO to recommend an implementation approach that best achieves that mandate with the least risk and cost to ZYX and its individual companies. A key point here is that these questions have the right amount of information in to give you the context to get the correct answer. There is nothing in there that is superfluous. Every item in that question stem is important to help you get the correct answer. So that bit about the risk to ZYX and its individual companies is important. So let's look at the answers. Answer A, transition all services and service providers for all companies to the Siam model at the same time when the contract with Outco ends. So that says in 8 months, transfer everything, all services, and have a new service integrator. That will affect every single part of ZYXS, every part of its business in 8 months. Certainly in a foundation body of knowledge, and I'm fairly sure in professional, it gives you an indication of the type of timescale for a Siam transition. A straightforward transition is usually 8 months. To try and do the whole of ZYXX in just 8 months is very, very high risk. It's a big bang. You've got a supplementary question about where does it define big bang, which I'll cover in a minute. There is nothing in the mandate that says, or in this question, that says the CEO wants all this doing as quickly as possible. So that, therefore, is not an appropriate approach to meet the mandate and what says in this question. It's high risk. There's nothing to say that the CEO wants it done quickly. So our answer is ruled out. Answer B, transition all services and service providers for all ZYX companies to the new Siam model in 6 months, addressing current integration issues. It's pretty similar to answer A. 6 months is infeasible. 6 months is far too short to transition all services across to Siam. Again, there's nothing in the mandate that says you need that length of urgency. Many of these contracts run for longer than 6 months. I mentioned earlier, understand contract durations. Terminating contracts early adds risk. So therefore, that is not a good answer. Let's look at answer D next. Transition ZYXD to the new model, pilot for 3 months, then ZYXS, pilot for 3 months, then all other service providers. Look at that and go, okay, that's by itself, that looks quite low risk because ZYXD provide hosting, prove the Siam model with them, pilot for 3 months, great. Then ZYXS, a bit more complicated, pilot that for 3 months, learn from that, that's phased, and then transition all other providers. The issue there is the Outco contract ends in 8 months' time. Let's say it takes 2 months to transition ZYXD, which is optimistic, then pilot for 3 months, that's 5 months. Then transition ZYX, say that's another 2 months, that's 7 months, pilot for 3 months, that's 10 months. The Outco contract will have ended by then with no arrangements to change it. You have not have transitioned any other service providers. So that is not a good answer because it risks ZYX UK's business, who are 100% reliant on external service providers to provide them with their IT services. So that rules out that answer, which therefore leaves you with one correct answer. So answer C addresses the current issue, which is Outco. And this question says it's all about Outco, which ends in 8 months' time. Transition ZYX UK first, pilot that, then transition the other service providers. A very sensible phased approach, addressing the burning issue first, ZYX UK, and then safely transitioning the others in a phased approach. You ask me, I can't find a statement in the book that says on Big Bang the service integrators and providers must be transferred at the same time. In the professional BOK 4.1.1, it defines a Big Bang implementation is one that introduces everything at once in a specified time frame, including the service integrator, the service provider, new services, and new ways of working. So that's the definition there. the same definition is also in the foundation body of knowledge. So that is a big bang. Service integrator and service providers at the same time. And a very good question, what will be or what could be a sequence of phase transition? For example, service desk and the strategic service first ones, then tactical and finally operational, is that right? In a phase transition, it really depends on the individual organization. You have to have the service integration layer in place first. That's pretty obvious. The service integration layer is key. It is very common to do the service desk provider at the same time, the service desk capability. So you have a service integration capability and a service desk capability after the same time. But after that, the sequencing for phasing depends on the characteristics of the organization, any specific challenges, and their appetite for risk. In the case study, Outco contract is ending in 8 months' time. And in that question, it says they're not going to renew that contract. So doing Outco has to be a priority. It can be a good idea to transition low-risk services first into the model. Now, because it's service integration, there's little benefit in transitioning one service because you're not testing integration between two providers. But translate two related low-risk services, which could be commodity services, to test the Siam model. Starting with strategic services and then going down to tactical and operational is probably a higher risk. A strategic service, by its very nature, if you have issues with it, will affect the organization. Unless there are any burning reasons why you have to do that one first, most organizations choose to do low-risk ones first. That said, if you want to do a strategic service first, that will test the model, really test the model, and stress it, and you'll learn very quickly. But every implementation, you need to weigh up the pros and cons. In your plan and build stage, do some scenario testing, do some risk analysis, understand the drivers, understand the constraints before you decide on that approach. And both the foundation body of knowledge and the professional body of knowledge cover this quite well in how you should go about this, in how you should evaluate the different risks. And you may need to go back and revisit your model, revisit your decisions about who should be the service integrator as you do that risk analysis. Any questions on this one, please?
No questions for now, Kevin.
Thank you. Question 25. ZYX has appointed Siam as an external integrator. The Siam transition provides a retained capabilities. So ZYX says where your retained capabilities are. For the past 3 months, Outco hasn't met its service targets, and Siam wants to apply service credits. So we're now live. We've got Siam live. We've got an external service integrator. Outco are providing services, are not meeting their service levels. We want to apply service credits. How can this be applied? Now, this question can be answered without knowing much about Outco, without knowing which services they provide. This is actually going back to pretty foundation level knowledge about the different layers and the roles of the different layers. There is extra information in the professional body of knowledge about service credits and how they should work. It's useful to have that information as well. So let's look at the incorrect answers first. So answer B, Siam the service integrator, inform Outco, the service provider, that credits are due, and they tell Outco, the service provider, to contact ZYX, the customer. That, from foundation knowledge, is an incorrect answer. The service integrator provides that link between the provider and the customer. Now, Siam would probably tell Outco that service credits are due, absolutely, but the responsibility for verifying the credits is with the service integrator. Responsibility for then relating that to the procurement department and the retained capabilities is with service integrator. So answer B from foundation level knowledge is an incorrect answer. Answer C, Siam or us informs ZYXH of the service failure. Good, good. So Siam or us are telling the retained capabilities. The service integrator informing the customer there's been a service failure. But then there's some incorrect information. We've now got the customer verifying and verifying the service credits. They are paying the service integrator to do that verification. So the service integrator to do that verification or calculation. So again, from foundation level knowledge, answer C is an incorrect answer because it's having the wrong activities at the wrong Siam layer. Answer D, Siam or us raise the service credits, doing the delegated authority, collect the money and passes them on to ZYXH. That is a plausible answer. I have seen some implementations of Siam, not many, where the integrator is doing some of the roles that the retained capability should be performing around financial management and financial handling. But financial collection, collecting money from customers is usually done from suppliers, service providers, usually done by the customer. So the integrator is there managing the service levels, verifying the service credits, informing the customer that credits need to be applied, but the financial arrangements are nearly always done between the customer and the service integrator. So D is plausible, but the better answer is answer A. These are the correct roles for the correct layer. The service integrator is calculating the service credits. They pass the data on to the retained capabilities, who then organize the collection of the money. Now, how it's done, it doesn't say. It could be money it could be retaining money from the monthly service charge. It could be actually sending an invoice for the money. It doesn't say that. But answer A best fits the advice and the body of knowledge, both foundation and professional, about who does what in which layer. Anything on that question, please?
No questions for now.
Thank you. I've added some additional information to this. The questions about reporting and service level breach. I think the question posed here was before discussing service credits or penalties. This is a real world question to specific providers. Is it necessary to find out what's happening where in the multi-source environment? And until then, should service reporting about that particular target be pending? In other words, you report on all other targets except this issue. Is this right? Now, there's nothing in the body of knowledge about this. Actually, it's unusual to suspend reporting. The first point here is that service credits can't be calculated until the level of failure on the service levels have been agreed. The body of knowledge does talk about that. So you can't start retaining money until you've agreed with the provider that they have actually failed the service level. That may require investigation with the other providers as to where there's responsibility lie. But separate credits from reporting. It isn't covered in the body of knowledge, but it is good practice that reporting continues on service level achievement, even if you haven't yet established ownership for that failure. This is the outside-in thinking. This is thinking from the user perspective, the customer. Let's say the service was lost for 2 hours. The customers know it was lost for 2 hours. They expect to see in the service reports reflection that the service was not available for 2 hours. Not reporting on that does not send a good message to your users. It implies that you might be hiding something. It's perfectly reasonable to report that there was indeed an outage and that you're still investigating where the responsibility was, but that reporting should continue. let's say that it was the application provider, so it was the application that failed, but the responsibility ends up as being with a hosting provider. Now, the first report should say that that service was not available for 2 hours. And the application provider would say they failed for 2 hours. And the hosting provider in the initial report could say, we were fine, hosting was great, it was fully available. But then, let's say, by the time the next reporting period comes along, you discover that it was actually the hosting provider. Now, the user-facing report still says there was an outage for 2 hours. The application provider report now says they still achieve their service levels, but then that's an updated version of the report. But then an updated version of the hosting provider report says they failed their service level, they were responsible. So keep going with reporting. Report even when you haven't agreed responsibility. Think outside in, think users. Now, where responsibility hasn't yet been agreed, the reports are normally signed off from a commercial perspective and not used to trigger service credits. So there is a link there, but please separate the two in how you actually apply Siam good practice. Anything on that question, please?
No questions, Kevin.
Thank you. Okay, we're doing well on time. The final question. During the plan and build stage of project New Gen, so that's the New Gen is about replacing the ZYX thing. It's about Siam, ZYX, New Gen is about, so let's recap. New Gen is about Siam transition. So ZYX has found that New Bank will run late. Now you need to understand the case study here. New Bank is the new application being developed for the banking customers by ZYXS. So that will happen after the run and improve stage. That means there'll be a part where ZYX needs to retain bank code to support bank. So bank code, the legacy provider for bank. So in other words, your legacy systems are carrying on. Now the timescales in the original case study said that New Bank will be available by the time you should transition to Siam. That's no longer the case. So you now have a legacy organization that needs to continue for longer. So let's look at the answers. I'll look at the wrong answers again first. Answer B, ensure all contracts have exit clauses and establish data record governance for operational governance. That should happen anyway. So all new contracts should have exit clauses and should have data record governance. So that's a valid answer. That's a good idea. But the question's about transitioning to New Bank. Not all providers are responsible. Not all providers have a role to play with New Bank. It's ZYXS and ZYXD principally at the moment. So that's a good idea, maybe not the complete answer, but it can't be ruled out in your thinking yet. Answer C, implement a common tool set to be shared by all service providers, end-to-end processes. Now, a common tool set, if you look at the tool set advice in the body of knowledge, can be achieved. It's highly unlikely, though, that you will get a common tool set to be adopted by all providers. So there are risks with that. So that's not necessarily a good strategy, a common tool set. Commodity providers, unlikely to adopt a common tool set. Major providers that have their own tool set, unlikely to adopt your common tool set. So it's possible, but question marks over it in your head now about whether that's really can be achieved. Answer D, standardized processes operated internally by all service providers and align them to end-to-end processes. Answer D says that every service provider should use the same processes and the same processes that ZYX say they have to use. If you read both body of knowledge, the foundation and the professional, it tells you that that is not a good idea. Trying to make all providers use all the same process is unlikely to happen. So this question is relying on knowledge about best practice for how to apply processes and how to align different providers. And it talks about that in a section which it wraps in a technique called enterprise process frameworks. which is about aligning contracts, aligning processes, aligning tooling, focusing on the interfaces between the different providers and different tool sets. That's what the body of knowledge talks about being in an enterprise process framework. Now, that process framework includes requirements for exit clauses and data record governance. So there's a relationship here with answer B, but answer A gives you a more comprehensive approach. So that's a best strategy, best to contribute to reducing the operational risk to other parties from the transition to new bank. Because if you establish a framework for how these processes interact, when you then later on do something with Bankco, take them out or add in a new provider, you've established that framework that everybody can align to. There was a question asked here about, is enterprise process framework in common usage in Siam? It's described in the body of knowledge. I haven't come across that phrase until we brought together the professional body of knowledge. It is used in some locations. I think Australia are using that terminology. But the key thing here is the body of knowledge. We are setting terminology. So an enterprise process framework is defined in that body of knowledge. So that is a good terminology to use for that framework for processes. You'll also remember the body of knowledge. We've got things like, what are they now? How we describe boards and things like that. There are certain structures that we use in the body of knowledge and describe how we do them. We are trailblazing in the body of knowledge, or we were. It's now been out sufficiently long enough that terminology we have used in that body of knowledge is becoming widely used. An enterprise process framework is one of those terminologies. It's good terminology to use for what it describes, a framework for aligning processes that applies across the enterprise. That's the final question. So first of all, any questions on that? And then we'll open up to any general questions, please.
So far, no questions.
Okay. I'm going to go back and recap. Some very key learning points here about preparing for the qualification exam, so what to do during your training and then during the exam. The case study is absolutely crucial. All of the questions in professional are set against the case study with additional information within the question. You have to know that case study inside out, back to front. There are dead ends in that case study. There is information you might not need to know in that case study. There is missing information in that case study. That's what happens in real life when you're asked to go into an organization to do some consulting and make recommendations. But you need to know where those dead ends are. You need to know where those questions are, where there's missing information. It's very, very, very important for trainers to go through that case study. And within your own training materials, use the case study. Ask the candidates in group sessions to explore the case study. Use the sample questions to explore that, because the case study hooks all this together. With that case study, with knowledge about Siam best practice, with general knowledge, with an inquiring mind, and with the ability to operate at those higher Bloom's levels, which means the ability to question, the ability to analyze, the ability to pull together information and identify based on the information in front of you and good practice, which is a better answer. They are the techniques that you need to be able to get the qualification. But then crucially, my last point here, two last points, don't make assumptions. The information in that question for each of those questions is key. So tease out, what am I being asked here? What is the important information? Try not to make assumptions. We have tried in those questions that the best answer comes from knowledge of Siam, knowledge of the real world, the case study and the question. That you don't need assumptions to get the best answer. I've also said earlier that we are going to look at the statistics now and look at any questions that may need work, and look at those particularly for the Japanese market to identify where some of the English may have caused some of the issues after translation. That may be a factor here. We don't know until we've done the work. But the key to getting this qualification is spending the time, spending the hours. I think we recommend 60 hours of preparation, and also understanding not just the professional body of knowledge, but also the foundation. Preparation is key, but having the right mindset, that inquiring mindset, that analysis at this level of Bloom's, that is what we're challenging here. That's what we're probing. And that's what we're looking for a Siam professional, someone that has that capability to do that, take information, analyze, structure, and come up with the best answer and best proposal. Any questions?
No, we haven't received any questions. So I think the topic is well explained. So just as a reminder, the presentation has been recorded, so you can watch it later to catch up any of the subjects that was explained by Kevin. Kevin, I would like to say thank you on behalf of EXIN for your presentation.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yes, please.
Can I ask for a show of hands from the attendees? Did you find that useful?
You can type on questions.
Yeah, so please type yeah. If you found that useful, please on chat type yes. If you didn't find it useful, please type no.
I received one yes.
Good. One is better than none. I hope you have found it useful. I appreciate that I'm speaking English, which isn't your native language, and you may need to go through it again, and I may have talked too quickly at some points. I hope it has been useful. I hope you've given some insight into how the questions are constructed, the kind of thought processes that you need to go through to come to what is the correct answer. I'm quite happy to take further questions by email after the session. So if, having reflected on this and listened to the recording again, you have any follow-up questions, please do send them through to EXIN, and I'm very happy to take those and answer them.
Okay, Kevin. So I would like to say thank you to all of you that attended the session. And then again, in case you would like to access the recording soon, the link to watch it is going to be shared with you. Thank you very much to all of you. Have a great day or evening at your region. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Kevin.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.